Joko Beck asks, why don't we practice? Why are we full of good intentions? Why are we full of resolutions? And our practice stumbles, stops. Our answer is quite straightforward, if not entirely enlightening, because we don't want to. And I think it'd be reasonable to say that we don't want to because it's unpleasant. It can be boring. It can be painful, literally or psychologically. It can be just not what we want to do. The experiencing of that, the experience of pain, boredom, dukkha, is our resistance to life as it is in this moment, our resistance to our practice. So what do we do when we experience this resistance? Well, quite often, frankly, we bullshit. We make up excuses. We act as if this was never an issue anyway, or. And it's around this idea of our resistance to our resistance, our bullshitting, and the central connection with that with delusion. Our delusion, the delusions of the world, that I want to begin to talk about over the next couple of Dharma talks. And this is in connection with the fifth precept, which is one of those which is common to all, or virtually all, traditions of Buddhism. It's the one, more or less, some version of I refrain from using alcohol or other substances that cause heedlessness. This is generally taken in the sense of, yes, I need to keep clarity of my mind. I don't want to cloud the mind. I want to see straight. But in our ordinary mind tradition, Diane Rossetto has put this slightly differently, and I think very illuminatingly. She rather talks about substances, actions, responses, habits, which keep us from experiencing the teaching of this moment, the teaching of our life as it is, the only teacher, as we say in the practice principles. So how does that happen? I think it's a really important distinction because, as we'll come back to, no delusion greater than the idea of having no delusions, of seeing the world as it really is, but of being aware of and sensitive, at least to some extent, the teaching that this moment is offering us. Well, that's something. So my basic approach to how our practice works is turning away. There's something I don't like, I turn away from it. As I said, this can be literal, it can be emotional, it can be distracting myself, it can be, well, anything. We know when we're doing that, or hopefully we begin to become increasingly aware of when we're doing that, because of this sensation of resistance. And it's a resistance I feel physically in my body. It's a resistance that I can become aware of in my mind. Feeling literally that my gaze is being taken somewhere else. My thoughts are being dragged off somewhere else. And, well, it's always me doing the dragging, so sense of resistance to just this moment. And so we have my life as it is, and then we have my resistance to just being this life as it is in this moment, this particular moment, this moment of zazen, this moment round the dining table. And I can experience this resistance, and I can stay with my resistance as experiencing. It's not this beautiful clarity, it's not this blue sky, but I can stay with this experiencing. Or I can turn away from this too, not just turn away from my life, but I can actually turn away from my resistance. And that's when, in my terms, I'm really talking bullshit to myself, to the world. So what's this got to do with this precept? Starts with the use of alcohol, extends to all these other substances, activities. We'll get around to that. Working as a chaplain in prison, our faith supervisor was very clear that in terms of alcohol and other drugs, no means no. Said you're going into an environment where alcohol is banned, drugs are banned, they're around, they abound, but they're banned. And a lot of the people you're going to be working with have found Buddhism because, frankly, they've got real problems with addiction, or they've had problems with addiction. And Buddhist practice seems to offer a solution. Temporary in some cases, much longer lasting in others. A turning away from this self-destructive activity. It's not really very good if you come in and say, last weekend. And in fact, one of the prisoners I was working with told me, as a genuine experience of his, of course, I have no idea, but I assume he was being straight and frank and upfront about the alcohol support worker and the alcohol support program, who came in one day and said, so sorry I wasn't in yesterday. I mean, the night before, got absolutely plastered, just couldn't get out of bed in the morning. And so I think in that sense, he was right. And there's a very immediate and superficial level of bullshit that we can persuade ourselves that something is okay, is allowable. And this is in this practice where we keep coming back to the idea of self-honesty. Am I being straight with myself? Am I being straight with my practice? Am I being straight with other people? But of course, our practice is about investigation, not prescription. Even if for many, many of the world's Buddhists, the idea of not using alcohol means not using alcohol, for many more it doesn't. And we're certainly not in the business of saying can or can't, because that's not what this practice is about. And so I really want to take us back to our resistance. Let's try and unpack this a little. Said about the alcohol support worker who couldn't make it to work because of his alcohol use. It was with another Zen group practicing this time of year, and after the sitting, good sitting, everybody group's fantastic, great talk, wonderful time. And the teacher said, I think what we need now is cocktails. Oh, okay. That's a change of gear. Not quite sure about that. Which makes me think of the first time that I heard any of this really seriously discussed, which was at a Plum Village retreat. They had senior lay members there working through the mindfulness trainings, as Plum Village calls the precepts. Went through, one of the teachers would explain it, there'd be sensible questions, great, till we got to alcohol. Very sensible, straightforward exposition of the ideas behind the mindfulness training. And then we got to the questions. And it was immediately apparent that what we actually had were people who wanted to be good Buddhists, they wanted to practice, but the idea of not drinking was just such an issue for them. They felt immediately threatened. They felt unhappy. They felt, well, clearly all kinds of things from their questions. And they were coming up with the, equivalent of, does this precept really mean that I can't kill anyone? Does this precept mean that I can't actually steal at all? Does this precept mean that I can't lie, even on Tuesdays? I mean, that's just not practical. So what was it that was making this so different, that was really bringing up our bullshit? Not just a turning away, but the idea that our turning away was inevitable, reasonable, rational. That there was nothing to be discussed here, not really, because the idea was just so crazy. We can experience our social expectations, social responses around alcohol and giving up, not drinking, not as a prescription, as in, whatever. One finds very strong reactions from other people. I certainly did have. Why aren't you drinking? They assume naturally, if you don't know them well, that you're an alcoholic, you're on serious medication. If you do mention Buddhism, then clearly you've joined some kind of cult that's forcing you down this mad path. And clearly, they tend to experience your not drinking as some kind of challenge that you don't think, therefore, that they should be either. It's complicated, and yet they will perceive you as being smug, self-righteous. What's really going on here? You say, I'm not drinking. And you get other people's resistance. They feel uncomfortable. And they feel separate. And you, of course, in this sense, are separating yourself off. It's a difficult, complex situation. So what's really going on here? What is bringing up our resistance? And how do we experience this resistance? Well, I might call it boredom. I might feel restless. I might have intruding thoughts that I don't want. Yeah, let's take this right back to our experience of Zazen. Sitting. I experience the tightness in my back, the stiffness in my knee. These are things I don't want to experience. In Zazen, I try and stay with these. I try and stay with my feeling of not wanting, of resisting. I see where that leads. My intrusive thoughts, I do the same. I may touch into really horrible things from time to time, or it may just seem dull, pedestrian, uninteresting. Surely there's something better I could be doing. Maybe I could drink a glass of wine that would give me a nice warm glow. Maybe it would make me feel a bit better about the world for a little while. What I'm touching into with all of these experiences of resistance, all of these feelings of resistance, is, well, fundamentally my suffering. My suffering as this embodied being, my suffering as a being with a sense of self, a sense that I want agency, I want autonomy, I want a sense of control. We've touched into the idea of the sense of mastery, but we don't even have to go anywhere near that far. Just, I want to be in control, and I'm not in control of this body, I'm not in control of these thoughts. And there are things I can do. Give me that sense of control to a degree, however temporarily. But what's causing my problem in Zazen and what's causing my problem in life is my dukkha, this sense of dis-ease, this sense that there is the presence of things I don't want and the lack of things I do want. So either control or simply relief. Either will do. Diane Rossetto, in Waking Up to What You Do, gives us, as so often, some interesting examples, and quite often rather than the example she's pointing to up front, I find some of the conversations just which she has with her students interesting and quite revealing. So this is one student. As I work with this precept, I realise that I have expectations that I should experience certain feelings around certain situations. For example, I should feel happy when I get home from work at night and see my partner and kids. When I don't, I often reach for a beer or a glass of wine so that I can relax and loosen up in order to enjoy them more. I know my intention is to relax, but would that be such a bad thing to do if it allows me to be there and enjoy my family more? Would you call this an addiction? So Diane Rossetto's response is, but are you really there? Would there be another way to be there and honour the tenseness rather than ignoring it? This is what your practice can offer you. There are lots of ways to talk about addiction. There's a physical addiction at a cellular level, in which the organism comes to crave certain substances. This is the level of addiction of the drug addict or alcoholic. Then there's a more general way of talking about addiction, much like what you might be describing here. I think of addiction in this way as a requirement, key term of Diane's, a requirement that causes us to act in body, speech and mind in a certain way in order to alter our experience. What's your requirement here? And the student actually knows. Quick back, that I always be relaxed and enjoy coming home and being with my family. Diane asks, and is that true? Are you always relaxed when you come home? And do you always enjoy being with your family when you come home? No. Diane again. So where is it written that you must always be relaxed and enjoy your family? This question is your point of entry. You've observed yourself in action. Now you circle into the next spiral. Grab this question with your life before you reach for the bottle of beer. You'll learn something. I don't know what that'll be. This is your discovery. Own it. Your addiction is your requirement, not the beer or wine. And so this is interesting. And that word of requirement, which Diane keeps coming back and using over and over again, I like it and I don't like it at the same time. I like it because it points to this, what do I need in order to be the me that I think I am, the me that I'd like to be? What do I need? What do I absolutely have to retain this sense of self, which I have about myself? So you can say requirement absolutely central in selfing here, this way of being the me. Either the me or both, I suppose, which I think I am and that I want to think I am. But it also has a kind of moralistic air, I think, in the sense that it's throwing it back on me. It's just your requirement, grow up, man up, pull your socks up, pull yourself together. Oh, I don't seem to be able to. Which seems to me to be wrong. And in fact, what's that word which the students uses? They're saying expectations. I have this expectation. And immediately you want to say, well, yeah, where? Where does that expectation actually come from? Because in a sense, the expectation is what's feeding your requirement. So actually it's the expectation which is feeding the addiction or feeding the need, filling that requirement in order to be me. Because I have expectations of myself and I have expectations of how other people will be. I have expectations, in fact, of relationship, of how things should be between us, how things should be with my partner, how things should be with my children. And what makes these expectations what they are? I've already pointed to that in the sense of how you frustrate people's expectations when you talk about not drinking. It's, oh, hang on, no, that's not how things should be. That's not how we organise our world. That's not how I organise my life, my family, my social activities. Where do these expectations come from? Well, we can take that in two directions. And if we're going classic Joko Beck route, we'll say, aha, we can trace this back to your core beliefs, this fundamental sense of inadequacy, of lack, which expresses itself in whichever formulation it does. That goes right back into your distant childhood. And we've looked at that, and in a sense, I think that's, yeah, absolutely, let's go there. But in a sense, that's almost like the pop psychoanalytic idea that, well, it's basically all the Oedipus complex, isn't it? It's all about your mother. And again, that's perfectly true. But how am I going to take that? And how am I going to understand that? And how am I going to work with it? And there's another dimension. Okay, we've mentioned this before, we'll mention it again. Which is the world. My expectations come from my social world and how that functions. And actually, what is it to be a good parent? And how does that square with being a breadwinner? Traditionally, we've kind of separated, but they kind of overlap. And both of those rely on how we define what's public and what's private. The world of work, the world of family life. What's to do with earning money? What's to do with raising my children? The crashing change of gear coming home from a work environment to a family environment. And is their partner doing the same thing? Or are they based at home? And how are the children and how are they responding? And immediately there are so many questions around these shifting multiple identities about who actually does what in this home, in this family. How do we all relate to each other? Which it seems to me is every bit as important as core beliefs or how my relationship with my mother is or was. But if we stick with the idea of core beliefs, we can keep it just all about me. And that's attractive because, again, that keeps coming back to then I can be in control. Then I've got autonomy because I can fix this. And I suppose what I'm trying to argue all the time is that, well, no, not being able to fix it is part of the deal. Not having autonomy or having limited autonomy, relative autonomy, relational autonomy is actually the deal. And can I understand that? And can I work with that? Because if I can, then it's not all about me. And I don't have to be this fixed, frozen self with its requirements, with its expectations. See, all of those requirements, all of those expectations, these multiple identities, these allocations, this public-private, economic, family, good parent, breadwinner, these are actually all relationship questions, and they're also political questions. I don't mean party political. I mean about how we, as families, as communities, as nations, as the world, collectively organise our values of what's important in our life, what matters and what doesn't. And in that sense, these questions are deeply political. So what's the solutions, or moving in the direction of solutions? Well, I can take the easy answer, and I can leave things pretty much as they are. Get a beer out of the fridge. And in an absolute sense, what's wrong with that? Or I can have that conversation, or those conversations, with my partner, with my children, maybe my boss, maybe whoever is part of this connection, this interconnectedness, this interbeing of these complex relationships. That's the harder route, and as Diane says, I don't know where that's going to go. Maybe I split up from my partner. Maybe we get it sorted out. Maybe I stay at home and look after the children. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know who they are. But that would be a way to go. That's openness to not knowing. That's infinite possibility, or finding out the limits of possibility. So that would be, in Diane's terms, staying with my resistance, not letting my requirement dominate me, but allowing the staying with the experiencing of that resistance to begin to soften this self, to begin to open up other possibilities. But am I going to try and just keep that within me, or am I going to allow it to become part of the relationships of the world? And I think that's how we stop our bullshitting, by letting all of this move outwards to involve us all, my intimates, my wider circle, the world. Because it's through this sense of connection with the world that I cease to be this frozen self, this self-limiting self, and become something softer, but also much richer, much more involved. So recognizing our bullshit. When we're turning away from our turning away, when we're taking the easy answer, which isn't really an answer at all, not even the beginning of an answer. And we know that the opening the fridge, taking a beer answer may work to a degree some of the time. We also know that for many people it absolutely doesn't work. But challenging, becoming aware of our resistance to our resistance, of our bullshit, and instead just allowing that resistance. It's not blue sky. It's difficult. It's painful. It can be boring. But it's my life as it is, and it's the teaching of my life as it is, the only teacher, the teaching of this moment. And we model that in our Zazen. We model that in each moment that we dare to sit, and dare to sit with our resistance, and don't just turn away from it. That's more than enough for now, but we'll come back. We'll have some more fun with delusion.